essentially we came into an environment in which there was absolutely no discussion, capacity or activity addressing security sector governance. It was a highly polarized environment in which previous interventions, which had been part of the political contestation that took place in the early 2000s, had turned the issue into a political football. The parties that were political parties were engaged in a blame game in which there was no space for dialogue. And so I think what defined our approach was initially trying to see what entry points were possible. How could we create a frame for a reasoned, coherent national dialogue? I think we recognized that the security sector governance issues were a very, very significant part of the conflict and of the challenges facing the country. And at that time they were acute. If on that basis I was then to perhaps look at what was innovative about the way we approached the problem, it was to try to create a space for legitimate dialogue in the first instance, so that all the stakeholders and parties could actually enter into a meaningful exchange at a time when there was only a conflict over the issues. Creating an effective team and teams and negotiating spaces and processes is perhaps what we've done at ZPSP most successfully, given how sensitive and polarized the atmosphere was when we began the program.
Some aspects of transformation may not happen in the next 5 years. They are more like 10, 15-year processes. They may not happen until the hierarchy of the army, of the police, of the intelligence, the hierarchy is formally operational veterans, but the rank and file are people that were born after independence. But I think for now it's about really the dialogue, consensus building for the next 3 or so years at least.
There is need to build a national consensus, which I believe it can only come about if all players are inducted around the issues or the objectives why such a thing should exist.
As we were also reviewing as civic society in terms of how we have positioned ourselves in various communities, sometimes it's the language that we have been using. So it will be about rewording certain things. It's not, when you talk about change here, you're talking about an opposition political formation. But when you talk about transformation, you are looked at with a different perception angle. So it's also about how we will package our communication, how we will engage, where at the end of the day, we need to agree that, you know what, this is really about our country and no one is more Zimbabwean than the others. So it brings on things that we all agree on things that bind us all together as Zimbabweans who want a working economy, who want a working future. You don't get challenges around that. So because through the work of God knows what ZPSP had to do, we were just the beneficiaries of the luxury when they negotiated that space that we can actually dialogue together and build a consensus that we need to transform how our security sector functions. It's an opportunity that makes it possible.
Now, the process of getting there will actually require mediation and consensus building skills to be built into these various sectors so that they are able to negotiate priorities among themselves as sectors, and also negotiate for the integration of their own priorities into the national broader strategy. So that's one aspect where I see the mediation coming in as a methodology for me that helps us arrive at that national level SST strategy.
That dialogue, the fact that it happens in an environment where there was hostility towards the program, in an environment where there was hostility amongst actors and entities, That, to me, the fact that there's that dialogue, to me that is tangible to begin with. The second tangible entity, I mean, if you are going to be able to get a traditional leader who is extremely cautious, who is vulnerable to labeling, to identify full-time with the program and be able to be the spokesperson of the program, that is not just ordinary dialogue. It means there is a physical commitment that you can look at and see. We have a security sector in the country that has a reputation of being violent, of being anti-democracy, of being anti-human rights, being anti-people. That's the perception. Also, that's the reality, because violations have been carried out. So if you are able to transform the security sector so that those perceptions, those activities, well, they are not likely to disappear, because these are things that have happened over a long period of time, but they begin to be addressed, and there is an acknowledgement that those things are not a new normal, that they need to be dealt with.
That building consensus might necessarily in certain cases imply halting change, because for you to build consensus, you must agree with those who don't want change at all. And yet, it is building consensus that might actually spare the change that you are requiring, because you will not get 100% consensus. Even if you say consensus, you might get situations where others simply keep quiet because they realize the majority no longer agree with them, you see, and therefore you move forward that way.